where the human race began. Nearly 1 billion people live here. And it's a continent with an incredible diversity of communities and cultures. Yet we know less of its history than almost anywhere else on Earth. But that's beginning to change. In the last few decades, researchers and archaeologists have begun to uncover a range of histories as impressive and extraordinary as anywhere else on Earth. It's a history which has been neglected for years, and it's largely without written records. But it is preserved for us in the gold and statues, in the culture, art, and legends of the people. My name is Gus Casely Hayford. Over many years, I've studied the history and culture of Africa. As an art historian, I'm used to drawing stories from mute objects from the past. I'm going to discover the history and find out what really happened to the lost kingdoms of Africa. I'm beginning my search in the far north of the continent, in what is now known as the Sudan. I'm looking for the legendary kingdom of Nubia. Nubia is the traditional name for the northern part of Sudan, near the Egyptian border. For thousands of years, a civilization dominated the area there, in what's now the Eastern Sahara. It's first mentioned by the ancient Egyptians as a primitive outpost, a source of slaves and treasure, dancing girls and wrestlers. To the Romans too, it was a barbarian wasteland. Yet these people were conquerors in their own right, ultimately defeated not by their rivals, but by their environment. Nubia has left us some of the most spectacular monuments, not only in Africa, but in the whole world. There are more pyramids here than there are in Egypt. This was a major civilization, but its history is barely remembered. So what was Nubia actually like? How powerful was it? And what happened to it in the end? Mahmoud Bashir is one of Sudan's most respected archaeologists. He's taking me on a journey, not just through space, but time, going back nearly 10,000 years. To the time when humans first began to plant crops and to keep domestic animals. We're going northwards along the Nile. If it weren't for the Nile and its irrigation, this whole scene would be desert. And from the air, it's easy to see how narrow the cultivation strip really is. But Mahmoud tells me we're going to leave the green corridor of the Nile and head out into the desert proper. Out here is one of the toughest places on Earth. The temperature here is more than 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and yet there are still people working here. This is where I'm going to start my journey, right in the back of beyond. We've flown more than 250 miles north from Khartoum into the middle of the Nubian desert. 15,000 square miles of arid sandstone with scarcely a single oasis. From here we're going to drive across the scorching sands. And Mahmoud tells me we're going to start with the very beginnings of Nubian culture. More than 7,000 years ago.
Oh, it's hot. It's baking. What are you doing to me? I can't believe we've come out here. It
It feels like the middle of nowhere. It's one of the driest, most remote places I've ever been. But Mahmoud says that here there's something that makes all the suffering we've gone through really worthwhile. So let's have a look. But why did you bring me out here?
Actually, because this is it's very important place, and here actually where our story will begin. Something interesting.
Oh, it's a bell.
It's not a bell, but it's what we call the rock gong.
So how old is this, Mahmoud?
It's not less than 5,000
5,000
BC.
years? Wow.
Mm.
So I'm playing a 5,000 BC instrument.
Yes.
The actual sound is the natural result of the consistency of the rock, but it's been worn smooth by the actions of people playing it more than 7,000 years ago, long before the Romans, long before the pharaohs. This is a sign of human civilization. So would they sing along to this?
I don't know exactly, but I think they can imagine more dancing than singing.
More dancing. In the last few years, archaeologists have found hundreds of rock gongs like this in the Nubian desert, possible evidence of a sizable population. I imagine you'd be able to hear it from a long distance.
From a long distance, and I think, we think actually it's the same as what we have now about the drum language in Africa.
Yes.
It's probably it was doing the same function at that time.
Archaeologists think that people here may have used the rock gongs to communicate across the valleys, and that this is the beginning of the Nubian culture. But why here? This is the middle of one of the harshest deserts in the world. Mahmoud has something to show me. It's been a secret until recently.
Now I will show you a very special thing. Oh, have a look at it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. It's cattle.
Yeah.
And how old is that?
Something like 5,000, 6,000 BC.
BC,
BC.
5,000, 6,000. It's just astounding. When were these discovered?
It's just last March. Can you imagine?
Last March?
We are in August.
So not many people have seen
it. Ago. Yes, you are the second after the mission who discovered the site.
Really?
Really. You are the second to be here.
Rock art is the oldest form of pictorial representation known. Research has shown that the pictures are unlikely to be just a depiction of everyday life. Instead, they concentrate on subjects that are of great significance to the people who made them. So I'm amazed to discover that out here, deep in the Nubian desert, they should be making images of cattle. But this is desert, though.
But it wasn't the desert in 7 or 6,000 BC.
Mahmoud tells me it's a story of catastrophic climate change. Recent research has shown that some 7,000 years ago, most of the Sahara was in fact green. You can see the outlines of dry valleys or wadis. They were once big rivers which flowed into the Nile. And between them stretched grassland savannas of the kind that you have to go much further south to see today. So this area here, once upon a time would have had grass in it, it would have been lush, it would have supported cattle and probably complex communities as
Yes,
well.
And even wild animals.
What kind of animals might it?
Yeah, actually, based on the rock drawings we have around here, we have lions, we have elephants, we have giraffes.
So the wildlife and the ecology of sub-Saharan Africa once existed?
Yes.
That's amazing. And this is the proof of that?
Yeah.
So you can imagine sort of the cattle, well, with a stretch of the imagination, the cattle in this valley, the river just down there.
Yes, yes.
And people, someone at some point coming up here and with one of these stones just
And
making this
depicting all this kind of drawings.
Yes.
It's amazing, really.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe the same people who play the rock gong are the same who depict these drawings here.
It took thousands of years for the desert to dry out completely. So the cattle herding or pastoralist society which created the rock art was able to develop into a much more complex community. The most important thing is the weight of evidence we now have the existence of Nubia as a remarkable, long-lasting and indigenous kingdom. Nubia wasn't a barbarian wasteland on the fringes of civilization, as the Egyptians and Romans would have us believe. It was a real power, which developed independently and rivaled the pharaohs, a place with a distinctive way of life. In the end, it became a victim of climate change. But I think that Nubian ideas of power, wealth, and kingship continue to resonate in modern Africa.